Tonight we're reading Chapter 12, Galveston Island. After many weeks and almost 1,000 miles of bumping along dusty Texas roads, Papa pulled the wagon to a stop. Up ahead was the longest bridge any of them had ever seen. The bridge was made of wood and stretched for 2 miles, connecting Galveston Island to the mainland. The blue Gulf water spread out on every side, while the puffy white clouds painted the blue sky above. There was a light, balmy breeze blowing in their faces as they poked their heads out of the front of the wagon. Other wagons, buggies, and even some of the new motor cars were filling the bridge, coming and going to and from the island. "Pansy," said Papa in his teaching voice, "you're about to see more people and more activity than you've ever seen in your life. Galveston is one of the busiest shipping ports in the South." Of course, Papa was right. Back at the log cabin ranch house, they might have a neighbor drop by every few days. They seldom saw strangers. They were about to cross a busy bridge onto an island with non-stop action and activity. Pansy's heart raced at the thought of what awaited them just across the bridge. Papa whistled to the horses and pulled the wagon out into the traffic on the waiting bridge. The horses' hooves made a loud clumpity-clomp sound as they pounded on the wooden planks. No sooner had they pulled onto the bridge than a sound coming from behind them began to grow louder. Papa was about to lean around the edge of the wagon to see what was coming when they all heard a blast of a horn. Beep, beep! It startled the horses, and it was all Papa could do to keep them walking straight. Beep, beep! Again it sounded, as one of the new motor cars swooshed around them. "Darn new-fangled machine," said Papa, with a look on his face of anger mixed with a little concern. "Papa," Pansy spoke up with excitement in her voice, "that's one of the new motor cars we've heard about. Wow, they're fast." "Yes," Papa said, "and obnoxious." Mama laughed with a knowing twinkle in her eye. Pansy, has Papa ever told you about the time he drove a motor car?" "Really, Papa?" exclaimed Pansy. "Now, Mama," said Papa, "there is no need to talk about that." "I think it's a cute story, Papa," said Mama with a light-hearted laugh in her voice. "On one of your father's trips to Silver City, he ran into an old friend who had just bought one of these new machines." "Really?" asked Pansy. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Did you get to ride in it?" "Oh no," Pansy said, Mama. "More than that, he drove it." Papa looked disapprovingly as Mama continued. "The man told him how to start it and steer it." Papa interrupted, "But he forgot to tell me how to stop it." "Yes," said Mama, still laughing. So Papa's friend told him to go down the street and park it in the shed by his house. Papa took off and did just fine until he got to the shed. "What happened then?" asked Pansy. As he came close to the shed, his friend noticed he wasn't slowing down. "Slow down, George!" yelled his friend. "Push the brake! Push the brake!" he hollered. Not knowing what to do, Papa started yelling, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" like it was a horse. Mama was laughing so hard she could hardly tell the story. "Then what happened?" asked Pansy. "He drove right through the back of the shed, still hollering, 'Whoa!'" Now both Pansy and her mama were laughing. "It's not funny," demanded Papa. "I had to pay for fixing that shed." I know," said Mama in a sweet and understanding way. "But the story is almost worth what we had to pay." "Maybe for you," said Papa, "not for me." Despite his angry tone, Pansy could see a hint of a smile around Papa's eyes. She knew he really thought it was funny too. They moved steadily across the bridge. Other motor cars passed them, but not with such loud beeping horns like the first one. Even a few fast buggies sped by on their way to do business on the island. The Hunt family clomped along with beds hanging from the sides of the wagon and chickens clucking underneath. No one would have to wonder if we were from out of town, thought Pansy. Eventually, they came to the end of the bridge and they were on Galveston Island. The traffic on the bridge was nothing compared to that on the main street of the city. Pansy's eyes strained to take in everything she was seeing. Huge palm trees lined the main street. Beautiful, exquisite, Victorian-style houses, like the dollhouse Ginny's papa built for her. Motor cars were everywhere, zipping up and down the wide passageway through the city. A trolley car, pulled by horses, went up and down the middle of the street, loaded with well-dressed passengers. By now, both Mama and Pansy had crawled out onto the seat of the wagon to get a view of everything. The tall buildings that looked like they reached to the clouds awed Mama. Pansy's eyes were drawn to something else. She had spotted a candy store. Wow, she thought to herself, a whole store filled with nothing but sweet candy. Back at the ranch, such things were rare treats. Sometimes Papa would bring some peppermint sticks or licorice from his trip to Silver City. The sight of that much candy in one place at one time astonished Pansy. "You looking at something, Pansy?" Papa said as he watched her staring at Miss Polly's candy delights. "Oh, nothing," said Pansy, "just looking around. There's so much to see." Papa laughed and said, "I'm going to pull over here at Moore Brothers Feed and Supplies to pick up some things we're going to need for camping. Why don't you and Mama walk across the street and check out Miss Polly's candy delights?" "Really?" Pansy exclaimed in her most excited voice. Everyone laughed as they climbed down from the wagon. Papa tied up Star to the wagon wheel and headed into the supply store. Mama and Pansy headed across the street. Even from outside the candy store, the smell of sweet chocolate mixed with 1,000 colors of various kinds of candy delights filled Pansy's senses until she was almost dizzy with delight. Even Mama was taken back, and a little overwhelmed at the sweetness of Miss Polly's candy store. Miss Polly, the owner, stood behind the counter with a big smile on her face. Pansy hardly heard Miss Polly greet them as she entered the store. "Welcome to Miss Polly's. May I help you, ladies?" Behind the counter was a large glass window. Beyond the window was another room where you could easily see dozens of workers busy making every imaginable kind of candy delight. They were mixing large vats of chocolate and caramel on one side of the room and baking colorful rock candy in the far corner. Pansy could see a large table in the center of the room with stacks and stacks of candy canes piled up like a mountain. A worker was loading these into boxes to be sent to other stores in faraway cities. "What do you want, Pansy?" "Pansy? Pansy!" Mama's words sounded like a faraway echo until finally Pansy awoke from her dizzy daydream long enough to realize Mama was calling her. "Pansy, what do you want?" "Sorry, Mama," Pansy replied. "I was just looking at everything. It's all so wonderful." Both Mama and Miss Polly laughed as they realized how overtaken Pansy was with all the candy. "I've never seen anything like this," Pansy exclaimed. In front of Miss Polly was a glass case with colorful candy sticks. After looking for a while, Pansy selected 3 colorful candy sticks that were orange, blue, and red with white stripes. She kept 2 of them in a sack for later, but started on the red and white striped one right away. The sweet taste was heavenly to her. Mama selected a couple of chocolate candies, and together they headed back to the wagon after thanking Miss Polly. Meanwhile, across the street, Papa was getting to know Mr. Moore in the feed store. Mr. Moore was a friendly businessman who always smiled and greeted his customers by name. When he saw Papa, he immediately recognized that this man was new to the store. "Welcome, sir," he said with a broad smile on his face. "My name is Mark Moore. I don't believe we have met." Papa smiled just as broadly and answered back. "Hunt," he said, "George A. Hunt." As the two shook hands, Mr. Moore could see Papa's wagon and team of horses out in the front of the store. It was obvious to Mr. Moore that this man was traveling and had come from a long distance. The way the wagon was loaded down, Mr. Moore thought Papa might be moving his family to Galveston, so he asked, "Mr. Hunt, it looks like you are loaded up to move. Are you planning to settle here in Galveston?" No, answered Papa. "We are taking a year-long trip from Lincoln, New Mexico to Galveston and returning in a few months." "Lincoln, New Mexico," exclaimed Mr. Moore. "That's a long, long trip." For several minutes, Mr. Moore and Papa talked about the long journey and some of the adventures getting here. They were laughing loudly about the skunk story when Mama and Pansy walked through the door. "What's so funny?" asked Mama. Mr. Moore tipped his hat and said, "You must be Mrs. Hunt, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." "And you must be Pansy," he said, as he smiled broadly towards Pansy. "Your father and I were just talking about the adventure on Skunk Lake and your smelly dog." Everyone laughed. Mr. Moore welcomed them all to Galveston and his store. After a while, they gathered the supplies needed, and Mr. Moore helped Papa load them into the wagon. "By the way, George," Mr. Moore said, "I know you are planning to camp on the beach, but I see your wife is in a motherly way. If you're planning to be here long, I have a real nice house for rent over on 2002 Avenue N.5. "That's a strange name for a street," Papa answered. "Maybe so, but it's a beautiful street and only a couple of blocks from the beach. Here's the address," Mr. Moore said as he handed Papa a scrap of paper on which he had scribbled down the address. "Go by and look at it if you think you're interested." With that, the two men shook hands, and Papa climbed up onto the wagon bench. Papa yelled, "Yah!" and with a crack of his whip, the two horses began to pull away from the feed store and down the street leading to the ocean. Pansy was still licking the colorful stripes off of her candy cane when Papa told everyone to look ahead. There in front of them, the road ended and the sandy beach stretched out to the left and right forever. Straight ahead was the Gulf of Mexico. The water was blue as the eyes of a Siamese cat. Out on the water, there were all kinds of boats and ships. The big sailing vessels were making their way into the port to unload goods from all over the world. There were also beautiful sailing ships, quietly slipping through the water with the ocean breeze filling their sails. It looked like something out of a dream, Pansy thought to herself. It was so beautiful, she hardly noticed how the beach was full of people getting in and out of the water. On the beach was a little corral of horses. People were renting horses by the hour to ride along the beach. Up and down the beach ran a road as far as the eye could see. Along the road were all kinds of shops and merchants. Papa turned the wagon to the right and started down the road, which led west along the beach. Papa broke the silence. "Mr. Moore told me to go right and drive on along the beach about 6 miles until we come to a campground where other travelers are camping. There will be water there for the horses and other facilities. We can camp there tonight." For the next few minutes, the Hunt clan just rode along, soaking in the beautiful scene. The sun was bright and the air was warm, but not too hot. The ocean wind, which constantly blew against them, kept everyone comfortable. Pansy commented on the lazy sound of the waves lapping up against the rocks here and there on the beach. About a mile down the road, they came to the largest, most fabulous hotel any of them had ever seen. The sign on the front said Hotel Galvez. It reached up several stories above the ground, with windows and little balconies facing the Gulf of Mexico in every room. On the side of the hotel was a large round ballroom with glass windows all around where people came for fancy parties and special gatherings like weddings and dances. Pansy was still trying to take in the beauty of the hotel when Papa spoke up saying, "Pansy, look over there. What do you think of that?" Across the street from the hotel was a sight that was almost too incredible for Pansy's eyes to believe. On the beach was an enormous Ferris wheel. It was filled with people riding round and round, with more folks standing in line waiting their turn. Pansy wondered how she had missed seeing this enormous contraption. Pansy had seen a picture of a Ferris wheel, but had never really seen one before with her own eyes. Everyone looked like they were having great fun. Mama looked at Pansy's eyes and instantly knew that what she was thinking. "Maybe later, Pansy, maybe later," Mama said with a smile. It was all so busy, so colorful, so noisy, and so different from home. Pansy had now climbed out of the wagon and was walking along with Star at her side. At that moment, though, for some reason, right in the middle of all that excitement and activity, her mind drifted away to the log cabin ranch house. She wondered if everything there was all right. As beautiful as all of this was, Pansy was aware how much she missed the old ranch and how she loved living on the prairie more than anything. Galveston was wildly exotic, but the prairie was home.